and this is the experience of inheriting a Nagios Monitored Environment. Please welcome Sofia, Lejman.
Thank you. So, yes, I will now talk about the experience of inheriting a Nagios Monitored Environment. And a little bit about me. I'm from Sweden. I live in Stockholm, Sweden. And I've been into IT since 1999. I have done the service desk, help desk career into second line support. I have done PC installations and fiddle around with servers. And now I am Nagios administrator and ITIL event manager at my office. I work at VIX Technology, and this is an international company that our region provides a validation system for public transport. I'm a supporter of Nordic Garrison, and they are a part of 501st Legion. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that. Got a guy nodding over there. I love these guys. They are Star Wars fans, and they use their greatest interest to help other people. So they create exact replicas of costumes from the villains of the Star Wars movies. And then they dress up, and they can attend events like toy store openings or theme parks. And the pay they get for this is a non-profit organization. The pay they get, they pump it into charity. So either donating to a specific cause, or sometimes they go buy toys and go to children's hospitals and give Christmas presents. So I like those guys. Me, I'm not in costume. I just help them out and well, bring them water and do whatever they need. Crazy cat lady. Yeah, I'm a sucker for kitties. And you're going to see this in my presentation. I can't really qualify, though. I only have one cat at home, so I might just get myself a starter kit. Okay, so we do have an agenda. I'm going to talk about implementing Nagios, some conclusions, tips and tricks, and then time for questions. All right, the background. You remember I worked for a company that provides ticket validation for public transports? That means we enable you to purchase a ticket, validate it, and start your journey without getting thrown off by the driver. That means having a bunch of front office devices and connect them to a back office system. And this has to work, or people will notice. So why would we need Nagios? Well, to make sure that our system did work and everything was up and running, we used to have daily health checks. And some of them were automatic, but a whole bunch of them were manual. And this took a lot of time. So we had to get away from that and get some automation. Turned out that another office, this was international, so we had an office in Australia that already used Nagios. And they could set us up without too much cost, would set us up on their server. So we would have our automation of the manual checks, and it would be better measuring of the service uptime for us. Also, we would have monitoring 24/7 instead of just manual checking. The plus was also that we could have an automatic incident creation and port our alarms into our incident handling system instead of having to do the incidents manually. So this sounded pretty good. we set up a project. Our Australian colleagues, they developed the checks. So we basically gave them the checklist for our manual checks. And I was on the project team as a technical resource. And I had performed those manual checks for quite a while. So after a while, the guys in Australia had something that we could test. Now, we wanted to do this by the book. Testing in a test environment, in acceptance, and then rolling out into production. The problem was, though, that there were some resources colliding. There was another project that was more business critical, a couple of them actually. So both of those environments, the test environment and the acceptance environment, were busy. And so were the testing resources. The only solution was to get someone to sit nights doing the testing. Guess who the someone was? Yeah, it was me. So, after a while of testing, we implemented into production. And what do you think happened next? Okay, it wasn't that bad. But most of the checks worked. But if you have, say, 10 checks that didn't work and there were 50 hosts, that's a lot of checks that sends a lot of alarms. And we had some errors in the checks. Some checks could not be tested because of the daytime testing for other projects. We could not send the crappy data that we wanted to see the alarms go off. So we had to leave those because it would have affected their testing. So some checks had errors that didn't show up until they hit production. We had some errors in the specifications. Remember, we gave them the checklist for our manual checks? For example, we had a file generation, and that took place at a specific time of day. And then we did some manual checks a while after to make sure that this file generation wasn't still running, because then it would have hanged or something was wrong. So, well, we got ourselves a Nagios check that reported a critical as soon as the file generation started. And it was completely according to the specification because we hadn't thought of changing it. We had some thresholds that were too low. Going from manual testing and into automatic testing, that requires having a lot of information. For example, we had a batch job, and it would run at nights, and it would hog all the memory. And that's what it was supposed to do. Only we weren't doing any manual checks during the night, so we had no idea that this was going to send off a critical. And all this amounted to a whole bunch of incidents. Let's say our services were not that happy with us the first week. Okay, so what do you do when you have a bunch of incidents or checks that don't behave as you thought they would? Troubleshoot. Yes, I did some troubleshooting, the best I could, and I wasn't that familiar with the system at the time, but changing the threshold, yep, I could do that, or some simple change in the scripts, but they were written in Perl, and I am not a Perl person at all. So what else can you do? You can talk to the developer. And he helped me out a lot. Problem was that shortly after the rollout, he got himself a position in another country, so he moved off to Thailand. And being a nice guy, he tried to help out as much as he could, but he simply didn't have the time. So that was not an option. But what about his boss? Maybe his boss could find some other resource to help us out with this. So we put together a list and sent a request to the developer team's manager. Thing is, I had no idea how busy that office were. Those were the guys that were doing all the changes, all the software changes, all the troubleshooting, third line, and they had just lost one of the resources. And they were also busy with a bunch of other projects, so they just didn't have the time to help us. And as important as this was to us, it was definitely not business critical, and they knew that we had the manual checks to fall back on. So we couldn't get prioritized. Yeah, that was pretty much how I felt. Everything I thought was a way to handle this just failed. So what do you do when everything that you think you can do doesn't work out? Well, you gotta have yourself a little bit of luck. You got yourself a service desk hero. There was a guy in service desk who was working part-time because he was studying to be a programmer, and he knew some Perl. So I gave him some of those scripts because it was not the easiest stuff left. I had taken care of the easy stuff. But the scripts I gave to him, and he fixed some of them. So our incident levels dropped, and this was great. This was a big break. And then he had to go take care of his studies a bit more. But then we also had a developer who actually worked in our team in Stockholm. And this guy had been busy because he was in those projects. So he was a specialist, so we couldn't bother him with the checks. But as his projects were finishing, he had some more time over. So he had a look, and he started to fix the rest of the checks. So that was a big relief. Yeah. Got it working. Now it's a happily ever after. Because a monitoring system, that's set and forget, right? They'll just run in the background. No, it's not just a run in the background thing. There's always going to be some things that needs to be changed. Or somebody is coming up with, oh, hey, we didn't think of this, but we need to monitor this thing too. So add another check or modify stuff. Also, there can be changes in your IT environment, and that means you're going to have to need to change adapt your monitoring. So it needs maintenance. So what about conclusions? Did we learn anything from this? Start with the firewall ports and the VPN connections. That was one of the things that took the longest time. Security requests, they can take a long time, so it's a good thing to start with those. Also, make sure that you have access to a test environment and an experienced tester. You need to send that crappy data through the system. You need to see those alarms fire off, because otherwise you don't really know what's going to happen. Even if you think that everything is working as it should, you won't know until it's tested. Yeah, test it thoroughly. When you think the checks through, you have to be very clear with the specifications. Yeah, file generation that gives off critical. You're going to feel pretty stupid if you get one of those things, and everything is according to a specification. Also, those wonderful things that happen at night, they have to be taken into account. And what more can you need? You need a good programmer. This is vital, because if you don't have programming skills yourself, make sure that you have someone in your team who has. Unless you're going to do everything just by modules, you're going to want to modify and create your own scripts, because it's so much easier when you can specify so much with it. So a good program is really, really important. It's normal to have some tweaking after a rollout. So make sure that you have the resources for a little longer time. Our case was kind of extreme. Somebody just moving off to Thailand is perhaps not the most normal thing for your projects. But you can make sure that they don't go on a long vacation afterwards, at least. Keep a logbook and a script repository. The first few changes, yeah, you can remember those. But after a while, you're going to have so many changes that you need to keep them sorted. And version control for your scripts, that's really important. So a logbook and a script repository. Yeah. Plan for improvements. The more you learn about Nagios, the more you're going to want to do. If you set up, being a noob, setting up a system, you're going to do the basic stuff. But the more you learn, the more you're going to want to implement, like a failover system, or yeah, you're going to want to add some more failover system and a test server, because if you do your changes on the production Nagios server, you don't want to risk messing up the systems. So you're going to need a test server. Yeah, most important of all, get some training. Not knowing the system and trying to make changes in it, let's just say that the training made all the difference. It gives you kind of a sense that now you know what you're doing. And since there are so many ways of setting up things in Nagios, you need to know what the system can do before you can choose the thing that's right for you to do, the best thing for your company. So yeah, I can really recommend training. Tips and tricks. Basic troubleshooting. Run your checks locally on the host. And if you're in Solaris, run it as a Nagios user, and then run it as root. Because if it works as root but not as a Nagios user, you have some permission problems. Then you run the check in the test check command in your console. That way you can see what happens when Nagios accesses the script on the host. And I once actually found a host with an IP that wasn't correct this way. So it's a good way of finding stuff. Check your host config files. If your check doesn't answer the way you thought it would, or if you get a timeout, and you know that the firewall ports are open. Check that you have Nagios in the permitted, in the allowed hosts section of the config file, because otherwise it's going to be pretty hard for it to get any answers. And those are the paths to those files for Solaris and Windows, if you're using the NS client. And check your host logs too, because that'll give you a pretty good idea of what's going on. And here you have the paths to those too. Where to find information as a beginner? Yeah. Those places were the best. Nagios FAQs. Search them through. It's a great place to find information. And Nagios XI library. Now this link, through that you get access to the support forum, the documentation, and the user and administrator manuals. And if you read those manuals, you get a good general understanding of how the system works. So I can recommend that. If you're using NS Client for your client hosts, you're going to have a good time accessing that web, that website. And if you can't find what you're looking for there, this website has a direct chat to Michael Medin, who created this software. And you can ask him for advice if you can't find what you were looking for. So he's a pretty helpful guy. You can always Google, and as long as you check that the Nagios version that you find your advice for is the same one as that you want to have advice for, because you're going to get pretty confused if your advice is for Nagios Core when you were looking for XI. So, any questions? Yes?
Hand up. Okay. You're a long ways away.
So you mentioned that the more you learn about Nagios, the more you want to do with it. Do you have any ideas for future plans?
Pardon?
Do you have any ideas of what other things you want to do with Nagios?
Oh, yeah. I'm just about to get my test server, so I'm going to mess around with that quite a lot. And I'm going to set up dependencies to make sure that we don't get any spam from network downtime. Yeah, well, the log server, that sounds pretty interesting. So that's, there are some future plans, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Boy, it's some quiet groups today, quiet groups. All right, well, if there's no other questions, once again, a nice round of applause for Sofia Lejman.
Thank you.